Welcome to the Wealth Horizon podcast, where we explore the latest trends, challenges, and opportunities shaping the financial industry today. In each episode, we bring you insightful conversations with industry leaders, sharing practical, actionable strategies to help advisors deepen relationships and reach growth goals. I hope you enjoy. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Wealth Horizon podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to have my friend, Dr. Rick Stevenson, on our podcast for a discussion. He is a renowned expert in the field of emotional intelligence, a Hollywood filmmaker, an author, and an internationally known keynote speaker. He's also the founder of StoryQ, a social enterprise created to help people connect the dots of their life through storytelling. Today, I'm thrilled to talk to Rick about StoryQ and the role of storytelling for families and individuals, and how this can fit into a wealth advisor's work with a family. So, hello, Rick.
Hello.
My first obvious question is, what does storytelling have to do with wealth management?
Great question. Well, all human communication is storytelling. It goes back to the circle around the campfire where people come and talk about their day and where people would communicate things that will help them survive into the next day. And it's become our main means of connection. If you listen to a speaker, they can be talking about theory, but the minute they start telling a story, you can see the entire audience lean forward.
Yeah.
You look at finances, maths. Numbers themselves are meaningless. Like, what does the number 233 mean? Nothing. But if you attach a story to that number, then it becomes meaningful. And so, in answer to your question, where does a financial advisor fit in with storytelling? Is if it's the job of the financial advisor to steward the assets and ideally grow them of a family, and ideally over generations, you need to answer the following question. Is wealth more important or wisdom? What's more important, wealth or wisdom? And I think that you'll find that while a lot of people just focus on the wealth, the reason that wealth may not survive is because the wisdom has not been passed on as to how to take care of it. And you capture that wisdom by being able to capture the story of the wise person that created the wealth in the first place. And that person, though, being someone's dad, often can't communicate that well to their family because it's dad. So the beauty of storytelling and capturing that story specifically on film is that it becomes the main means by which the person that created that wealth in the first place can assure that there's wisdom there, permanent wisdom, to be used by future generations.
I think that we know now, that the human capital of a family is most often the sort of make or break of a family's overall success, right? Or inability to pass wealth from generation to generation. But it really boils down to passing the values and the wisdom and the culture and fostering the talents that enabled the family to create the wealth in the first place, right? Which is the whole premise behind fostering the human capital. So yes. I would say probably the most important piece is the human capital. And that's where you come in.
Absolutely. So to answer the question, what's more important, wealth or wisdom? You can have wealth, but if you don't have wisdom, you're going to lose it.
So true.
And normally the person that's responsible for having created that wealth created it because they're wise, because they learned some very important things. And one of the most challenging things of all the people I've sort of interviewed among the patriarchs and matriarchs, they're trying to pass on that wisdom to the next generation, is that it's kind of a little bit like our experience as parents with teaching moments. It's really hard for, as a parent, to sneak in those teaching moments without them sounding a little bit too on the nose. Um, and so the beauty of storytelling and capturing your story and being able to lay it down in perpetuity is that this becomes a document for your wisdom, and that you're able to pass on the wisdom that way so that you're the people that are inheriting all of the advantages you've given to them know what to do with it. If they don't, what's the point?
No, I would totally agree with that. And that leads me to my next question. You know, we see that the wealth management industry, while we have seen some shift into fostering the human capital and making that a focal point of the relationship, I'm curious to know what your opinion is on why is the human capital still taking a back seat to the financial capital, and why do we see an industry that is so it's just built around financial capital? Why is it not the other way around?
That is a great question. Um, I think the answer is I'm going to be very straightforward and bold about the answer.
Okay.
People are nervous and uncomfortable about telling their story
Mhm.
because it involves an emotional journey. And it's much easier to deal with numbers. And the people that deal with numbers, a lot of which are financial advisors, have to be very good at that. And you lean into your strengths. But that is not the thing that people need most, your client needs most. And it's not the thing that ultimately holds the client. There's so many examples, especially when they're passing to next gen, of a financial advisor that has done incredible work, financial work, and the people leave it or her because there's no emotional connection. I go to the famous Maya Angelou quotation: people do not remember what you say, they remember how you make them feel. And so financial advisors ignore this at their peril when it comes to retention, but also not just their own self-interest, but when it comes to really serving the needs of their client. And I'll give you an example. Um, I have yet to speak to somebody that's been a wealth creator that doesn't ultimately treasure the sort of unity and harmony of their family above even their wealth. There's nothing that they want better than for their kids to thrive. And yet often, without all the elements I'm talking about, without really understanding your story, um, there all sorts of conflicts and misunderstandings arise. And we see this in multi-generations, especially politically, where people have just very different ideas. And it's exacerbated by the fact that if you're second gen, you're being born into someone else's story. Well, we're all born into someone else's story, but until we have the sort of courage and self-knowledge to live our own story, we're always living someone else's story. And that is also a prescription for failure for the next gen, because they need to somehow make there's a lot of safety in sticking with the wealth story, but they need to find their own way and figure out how to not only respect the wishes and the wisdom, but then carry it forward, because ultimately they're the ones responsible for what happens to the family legacy.
I'm curious to know how you see this applying to fostering, like, how do you see it facilitating communication between generations? Because we see that is a major challenge with families today.
Yes.
Generation, first generation just does not understand G2. For sure, they don't understand G3. I mean, I don't even understand G3, right? Because they're talking a whole different language. So how do you use storytelling to bridge the gap between those generations and then thereby passing on values and mission and whatnot?
Well, we do it in a very unique way at StoryQ, which I'm super proud of, and it's called the Family Voice Film. And its secret sauce is that instead of just interviewing the main wealth creator, we interview everybody in the family. Everybody gets a voice. Everybody gets to say whatever they want to say. And then we create a film for them out of that. And then we take all of those films and we create a family voice film. And inevitably, what's happened each time that we've done that, people have said the following. They've said, oh my gosh, so much I didn't know about my family. Oh my gosh, I didn't understand this is why he or she was this way. And oh my gosh, we have so much more in common than we think we do. And so this process actually becomes a healing process and a growing process. And it is definitely worth doing. I don't think there's anything more important people can do than to tell their family story collectively. But it takes a very special technique to do that.
And in the videos, these sort of legacy videos, right? The family voice, we're talking to multiple generations, multiple family members. Can you talk a little bit about your work with individuals as well? I mean, is it just for families or are we talking to individuals as well?
No, actually, the very core of even the family one is the individual interview.
Right.
It all starts right there. And it's called a taking stock interview.
Mm-hmm.
And taking stock is directly relevant to where the person is at the moment. I mean, unless someone's on their deathbed and nobody wants to do an interview like, oh, you're dying, let's capture your story. I've spoken to 90-year-olds that have big plans about what they're doing in the next 10 years. I love that. And so the interview is really about taking stock, finding out what influences have led to the way they are today and what their priorities and standards, values, everything, and what their expectations are for the future. So it's really at its core, everything we do is an individual interview. And we do another version of that with StoryQ for Kids, which is also known as the 5,000 Days Project, where we interview kids once a year as they grow up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Tell me, when you finish interviewing a family and you do a family voice, what is the most profound result that you've seen?
Normally, it happens in two stages. The first profound result is during the interview, because we're not there to give answers. We're not there to shape anything. We're there using the StoryQ method, which is basically a Socratic dialogue, conversation, but instead of using philosophy or psychology, it uses story, which is accessible to everybody. But inevitably, if we've done our job right, which is asking the right questions in the right order, in the right manner, the right time to help them get to their right answers, there will be revelations that come out of that. So the first of two things is the interview itself, at least half the time, produces some revelations. People go, I never thought of that before. I've never had that perspective before. I often think we live our lives as if we're standing in front of a 100-foot painting of ourselves and we're 1 foot away. I mean, what do we see? Not very much. So this exercise is just simply about taking people back. And I've also discovered that when it comes to their story and things that they struggle with or things that they want to talk about, people fundamentally have all the right answers to their questions. They just don't know it. They just need to be asked the right questions. And I found that as young as 5 years old, quite frankly. Um, the second profound result comes when you watch the entire experience on film, not only for the individual, because as I said, everybody individual gets a film, but also collectively. It's where for the first time you really see all of these disparate elements come together into a beautiful portrait. So it's a two-stage revelation typically.
Do you see the cohesion of a family sort of gel together and sort of a light bulb moment? Or do you see that people sort of, do you, I guess what I want to know is, do you see a difference in how they interact with each other after the video?
I'm not personally there to see that, so I wouldn't want to comment on that. All I know is that we get a lot of emails from people saying, what a great experience, and we laughed at this, we've done this, and, so I assume that when you make one of these films, that it ends up being a subject of conversation and hopefully an opening to discuss some things that maybe the family hasn't thought to discuss before, but needs to be discussed.
So I have to ask you mentioned it, and you mentioned it, not me. So I'm just curious. Have you ever done a video on someone's deathbed? Or
I
like
have.
looking at like almost there?
Yeah. Yeah. I interviewed a man who had about a week he was in hospice. He had about a week to live. And I just actually volunteered to do this. He was actually our house cleaner's husband.
Oh, wow.
And so I went to their house, and because he had a 4-year-old son, and I wanted to make sure that this little boy could know his father. So I went along and I did the interview. And while I was doing the interview, his son was singing in the background in the kitchen. And it's such a beautiful experience. And since that boy is now like 24 or something, and I've spoken about how meaningful that was to him. And I suppose if there's any comment I consistently get, it's like, I wish we'd done this sooner. But there's because you never start too early capturing your story, but you certainly don't want to start too late. And too late is when people die. And I have a personal story of that, in that I lost both my parents within a year. They'd been married 60 years. Just one of the most incredible relationships, 3 chance meetings across the backdrop of World War II. Incredibly romantic story. And we'd talk about it. I listened to it, but I never filmed it. This was like 15 years ago. I never filmed it. I didn't capture my own parents on film. And so this is my restitution, doing this for.
Wow. That's very powerful. And I think that resonates with a lot of people. I think a lot of us have this sense of like temporariness, especially when it comes to our parents. What a gift you gave to that man and his son. Very young to lose your dad.
Yeah.
So I didn't expect that. That was really sweet. So I would love to hear a little bit about, what does it look like when you engage a family for a family voice project? What does it look like when how do you even begin to draw out meaningful stories? How do you get buy-in from the family? How do you coordinate all of those things? I mean, I don't want to get into the weeds, but like, tell me a little bit about your work with families to even make that sort of project even feasible.
Okay, well, let me be really bold about this one too. Nobody wants to tell their story
Because it's messy.
because it's uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And there's people that think, oh, my story's not important. But, I subscribe to the Tolkien belief. Tolkien, in one of his lesser known works, viewed all of humankind as this grand choir that only reaches sonic perfection when every voice can be heard. And if you think about it, we're born, we immediately start taking. We take air, we take food, we take space. In the end, what do we leave for the privilege of living? I would say the most important thing we leave is our story. And yet 99.9% of us take it to our deathbed. Think of the sheer waste of human wisdom that goes out the door every day, every moment, every day, because we don't keep our stories. And what's interesting, though, is everybody wants everyone else to tell their stories. So
Hmm.
this is why it's really good to order it for your parents and order it for your kids. And then somebody else can order it for you. But it just takes some courage. That's it. But I have never, ever had an experience where somebody who started out, oh, I don't know about this, I'm nervous about this, and gave every excuse not to do it, and then did it, that didn't, in the end, really appreciate being able to do it. So it's a difficult area, and especially if for financial advisors, again, as I said, those people tend to be quite brilliant with numbers. Not always necessarily with the more touchy-feely side of things, but this is where, you need to this is where you deepen relationships and where you earn loyalty from people, because quite frankly, there is no growth in the comfort zone and no comfort in the growth zone.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
you really need to, I think, as a advisor, encourage people into the growth zone, and they will be thankful to you for doing that, even though the buy-in takes normally getting one or two people to say yes, and then them turning to other people and saying, hey, this wasn't so bad. And the great advantage of the way we do it is that every individual, down to the child, is in charge of their own story. So we will do the interview, then we'll cut the film for them, and then that film goes to that person and no one else. And then we do a shorter version of that film of the story we think they want to tell, of all the things they're willing to share, because there's a lot of stuff they don't want to share, which is totally fair and fine. I want them to be able to come in, say whatever they need to say. But ultimately what they want to share is part of this approved film that they give the thumbs up to before it then becomes material for the family film. So there's no way you can go wrong. You're complete control of your own story. If you mess up, you can start over. You don't have to be perfect going through it. But the way we edit it, you'll end up, sounding pretty profound and thoughtful.
How many generations do you typically work with when you do a family voice?
Typically 3.
Okay.
But it normally starts with the patriarch or matriarch. I have gone in and done the whole group, and I've also done one. I just did one with Craig and Connie Weatherup, who Craig used to be the CEO of Pepsi for 20 years, through the whole Michael Jackson, Magic Johnson, Madonna stage. Incredible man, an incredible couple that have this wonderful love story that wanted to start a family voice film. So they just started with them. And then the plan is to keep going further and further down into the family.
How do you normally see? Well, I know you mentioned. Let me just think about what I want to ask. So, um, you mentioned earlier that you've gotten a lot of positive feedback from families when they have completed a project like this. Can you give me other narratives or other stories of the impact you've seen after you deliver um, either an individual taking stock video or a family legacy? I'd love to hear a little bit more about a family's gut reaction.
I think it mostly comes from when they decide to share it.
Hmm.
They have their initial personal impression, then they have the family impression. But then I do a series of these taking stock interviews for an organization called Path North, which is filled with highly successful people um, who, despite their worldly success, are in this organization to find meaning in their lives. Because in the end, meaning and purpose are far more important than anything they've ever done. Because, quite frankly, you can succeed your way through things, but what happens when you retire? If your life was your job, people die. So purpose and meaning is absolutely vital to this. So we have done this thing called the Human Arc or the Human Library Initiative, because the wealth of Path North lies partly in the idea, but mostly in just its members. And so you can actually go on pathnorth.org and you can go to Human Library Initiative and you can see all of these short films, sort of 10, 15-minute films on the members. And there's just a wealth of information in there. And so the impact just keeps going as long as you use it. And in fact, the same thing is just starting to happen with corporations. We've also been hired by CEOs that want to do a combination of a bonding exercise that's going to, um, retain their top executives and grow communication between them, and also just as a means of appreciation. These CEOs will give a whole series of these films to the top 15 people in their company. And it becomes this incredible gift for the individual because then they can give it to their family. And I would submit there's no greater gift you can give to your family than your story.
100%.
And we've had employees that have received the benefit of this experience go, and if my company does this for me, I'll do anything for my company. That's the retention aspect of it and the bonding aspect of it. So the impact for anybody that does it, whether it be families or whether it be corporations or whether it just be individuals, it tends to be directly related to the extent to which you share it. And again, that employee, it's not for the company. It's for that employee, and they get to choose which story then they share, if at all. It's up to them whether they wish to share. But it proves to be like the most original gift you could ever give to somebody. And gift giving, especially for people that are everything, is just so impossible. We're finding this in our Mother's Day and Father's Day campaigns that, flowers, it's great, but they die. And a film, capturing your mother's or father's story, it's forever.
Yeah. And what do you give somebody who has everything, right? This is the perfect solution.
And what an original idea.
Mm-hmm.
Like, mom deserves a movie about herself. Yeah.
Don't we all? We all deserve a movie.
We all deserve a movie. So we've kind of democratized the documentary. That's democratizing the doc, because it's not cheap. It's not expensive either. We do it for a very reasonable amount of money. That is so much less than if somebody came and made a doc. So.
Rick, storytelling has become more of a mainstream idea. There's a few companies out there who are doing storytelling, who do legacy videos. There's a few of them. Can you talk a little bit about why StoryQ is different?
Yeah, there is a lot of people that are very competent videographers and interviewers and things like that. Where StoryQ is different is two ways. First of all, this method that we've developed um, is all about not only capturing your story, but capturing revelation as well. And um, then that becomes part, as I said, if you do the family voice film, that becomes a part of an entire journey that's not just making a film and capturing a film, but actually can be either just a growing journey for a family, or it can be a healing journey for a family. We've done both uh, very functional families and very dysfunctional families, and it's valuable both either way that you do it. And I would say that the second aspect that's unique to StoryQ is that I personally have done 7,500 interviews across 6 continents. I have, a lot of experience in this area, and I've written a couple books on it. And so it is a specialty, being able to know what are the right questions to help people get to their right answers. And we have 23 years of experience doing that.
What's your favorite part about the storytelling experience?
Surprises.
Mm.
I mean, you never know what you're going to get. I have this great story through the StoryQ for Kids. I used to do sort of 7 and up, because I thought that's where 7, 8, that's where kids start having sort of inner life going on. But I kept getting parents wanting to start earlier and earlier and earlier. I'm suddenly sitting in front of this 4-year-old, a little Muslim boy. And I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be a waste of his parents' money. This is a waste of his time. It's a waste of my time. But I noticed that he was really looking upset. And so I said, "Are you okay?" And he goes, "No." And I said, "Why? What's up?" He said, "Well, I've just discovered that the girl I was going to marry no longer wants to marry me." 4 years old. And I said, "How'd you find that out?" And he said, "Oh, she came up to him in the playground. She pushed me down the ground and said, 'I no longer want to marry you.'" And I said, "Well, that's pretty clear." And I sat there and marveled while for the next 10 minutes, this little boy processed his pain verbally better than I do. At the end of which he goes, "But there's this other girl." So it's just surprises. It's just full of great stuff.
That's awesome. Um, what did I not ask you in this interview that I should have asked you?
Oh, wow. I think you've done a great job. Asked a lot of good questions. um, well, sorry for being self-promoting, but where can we find out about this?
Well, I was going to ask you
Story,
about that, but now that you've mentioned it,
StoryQ.com or Rick Stevenson, rickstevenson.com. StoryQ.com, rickstevenson.com. I have and I can be reached if anyone has any questions at the clever email of rick@rickstevenson.com. So,
well, and anyone who
all right,
wants to
that's not
find
the most.
you, we'll put all of it in all that information in the notes and in the summary so you can find that very easily when someone's listening to this podcast or on our website. So we'll make sure to put all your info out there for anyone who's listening who wants to get in touch about getting a story. What did I excuse me, what did you not want me to ask you that I may or may not have asked you?
These very wonderful, aggressive questions here. Um, did I not want you to ask? I'm like a total open book. I'm talking about anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything that uh, I just love storytelling. I love human. I love. We are a species that thrives on connection, and if you look at the basis of storytelling, like why do we do it? I go back to a Aboriginal man standing on the shore of his village, looking out at the ocean. This was about 20 years ago. And noticing that the water is behaving strangely, that the birds had stopped singing, and that the monkeys were climbing the trees. And this uneducated Aboriginal elder knew something big was coming. He went back, got his entire village to high ground, and nobody was killed in the tsunami. So storytelling at its most fundamental means is about survival. And where we take it is hopefully into healing and into thriving. And that's why I say go back to the fundamental question we discussed in the beginning. And that is, what's more important, wealth or wisdom? It is clearly wisdom, because you can get wealth if you're wise, but you can't keep wealth if you're not wise. And so the suggestion that the job is simply to extend wealth is missing the entire point of how you build a family legacy and fortune that grows versus shrinks. And this is where storytelling and the sharing of allowing the genius that helped create the thing in the first place to give permanence to a story that isn't always easy to tell when you're disciplining your son or daughter in those teaching moments. I have funny experience where my son, and my oldest son, is so bright and knows everything technically and whatever. I have to keep turning to him every time he says, well, look it up here, and say, Max, not every moment has to be a learning moment.
That's what my kids tell me. So did I understand correctly that you were in front of an Aboriginal man? You weren't there during the tsunami. He was telling
No,
you the
thank
story.
goodness, because I would have been hanging out on the beach. No, this is a famous story that was
Wow.
published in the wake of that 2004, 2005, December 26th tsunami that took out a lot of Southeast Asia islands.
So one more question before we end. I want to know, what is your, if you even have one, your favorite story that you've captured?
Favorite story I've captured? There's just been so many of them.
It's a lot of pressure. It's like someone asking you what your favorite song is.
Well, I think, it's easy because I can just tell any of them. And they all kind of right up there. But I interviewed somebody. This is a fascinating story. It starts 23 years ago on a cold winter night in the Ukraine in a small village. And a worker is walking along the street and he suddenly hears a baby crying. And he looks around, and there in a bus stop garbage pail is a baby wrapped in a blanket that someone has left. And thankfully he heard it. He took the baby to the hospital, and hospital, sent it to the orphanage. This little girl was then a blessing to get adopted to a single woman in Virginia who had always wanted a child. And that little girl became a nationally award-winning filmmaker who came to the Prodigy Camp. This is something else I do. And has literally changed the landscape of storytelling in her abilities. And she's now just been hired at 23 as head of media at an LA Children's Hospital to help them fundraise. But she called a little while ago and said, I don't know how much longer I can do this, but I want to go back to Ukraine. And the project camp was like, okay, let us help you do that. But this is one story I've told. That's a fairly dramatic one.
Extremely.
Yeah, but I don't know. I feel like the luckiest guy alive. I love what I do.
That's amazing. Well, I want to thank you for talking with me today. I think this was an incredibly just interesting conversation, and I just thank you for sharing.
My pleasure. Thanks for your interest.